by assisting my ex-wife in forcing me to pay child support for a kid that was not even mine. My own sister destroyed my life. I'll start by being really honest and saying that, even if it wasn't always this way, I detest my sister. My elder sister, Nina, was someone I greatly looked up to when we were younger. She has, however, gradually revealed to me what a lousy sister she can be. You know, I was married to Susie for 2 years before I found out she was having an extramarital affair. The information was shocking to hear. I can still clearly recall the day when I was going through her texts and came across a discussion in which she revealed that she had been sexting with her 8-year-old male closest buddy. Susie had consistently reassured me that he was simply a friend who had been a part of her life for an eternity. Though I occasionally experienced jealousy, I had a great deal of faith in her. We had based our relationship on that trust, so I was completely taken aback when I unintentionally came across those explicit texts between them. It seemed like all of my preconceived notions about our marriage had vanished in an instant. When I challenged her, she broke down and apologized profusely. She maintained that it was an isolated incident and that she didn't value her friend in that way. She told me it wouldn't happen again and pledged to block him. I wanted to believe her, even in spite of my hurt and rage. I was so hurt by her betrayal that I needed to know why it happened and whether our marriage could still be saved, so we began to marriage counseling. Susie appeared sincere in her regrets throughout counseling. She worked hard to earn back my trust and accepted responsibility for her behavior. It seemed like we were moving forward significantly for a time. She was clear and attentive, and prepared to work hard to repair our relationship. I still loved her, and I wanted to think that people could change and relationships might get better, so I made the decision to stay and give our marriage another shot. But as you may have surmised, that turned out to be a grave error. After some time, I learned that my ex-wife was attempting to arrange a covert meeting with her male closest friend one night. She had earlier told me that she was going out with a colleague. But there was something strange about her conduct, and I couldn't shake the suspicion that she was lying. After Susie left, I made the instinctive decision to give the coworker a call just to make sure. They informed me, much to my dismay, that they had no such plans with Susie. A rush of confusion and misery swept over me. It was becoming painfully obvious to me that Susie was most likely meeting up with this guy. If not, she had no business being with me. I tried phoning her numerous times, but she ignored my calls, and my mind was racing with thoughts of betrayal. As the hours passed, an increasing sensation of powerlessness and dread overcame me. She finally returned home that evening, quite late, and very inebriated. Sitting on the couch in our living room, my head a tornado of feelings, I had been waiting for her all evening. She appeared utterly inebriated, and she didn't even recognize me. She simply stumbled past me, like if I didn't exist, as she made her way to the bedroom. I realized that the woman I had previously trusted and loved was no longer there for me, as I sat there feeling invisible and completely broken-hearted. I heard her phone ring on the bedside table with a message notification later, right before I went to sleep. Susie, obviously too inebriated to even change, had dozed off while still wearing her evening attire. I covered her carefully with a blanket and leaned over to see what message she had gotten, feeling a mixture of interest and worry. I knew as soon as I saw the number that it belonged to her male friend, him. As I read the text, my heart fell. That was a lot of fun. The tongue and sweat drop emoji at the end of the message, which only made matters worse, said, "We should do this more." Often a sick feeling swept over me. A guy wouldn't use those emojis in a message like that unless he thought something important had happened between them. Horrible ideas about what they could have done flashed through my head. My stomach turned to mush as I realized that my darkest worries were probably genuine. I tried calling myself, but it didn't work. I could feel the betrayal physically in my chest, and the thought of them together would not leave me. That night I was unable to get any rest. I lay in bed and tossed and turned, heartbreak and dread taking over my thoughts. I kept going over everything in my mind, wondering how I got to this point, and what I should do next. I knew that nothing would ever be the same by dawn, even if the night felt never-ending. Susie tried everything to avoid taking responsibility when I confronted her about the night she had lied. She initially attempted to control and gaslight me, saying that calling her coworker was an invasion of her privacy and that my lack of trust was the true problem. She said I was irrational and paranoid. I was upset and frustrated by her attempts to gaslight me, but I didn't give up. I pulled up his note, and I insisted on an answer. She dismissed it, calling me a freak for taking too much from it, and insisted that's simply how friends talk to each other. Her contemptuous demeanor simply strengthened my resolve to discover the truth. I chose to use my final card. If she didn't tell me the truth, I threatened to confront him. It felt like this threat touched a nerve. She tried to talk me out of calling him, seeming plainly nervous and concerned about what may happen. Susie reluctantly and with great fight finally gave in and admitted. She acknowledged that they had in fact made out after becoming wasted, and that she had been yearning to see him for a very long time. Her admission was like a kick to the gut. It validated all of my darkest suspicions and destroyed any faith I had left in her. She went on to defend her behavior, claiming that our marriage had grown monotonous and that she was looking for stimulation elsewhere. I strongly objected, highlighting the fact that our marriage had failed precisely because of her lying and adultery. I told her that once I found out she was sexting with another man, there was no way things could ever get back to normal. She kept trying to justify her actions, but I didn't back down. I made it plain that she was solely to blame for breaking our vows and undermining the confidence we had developed. I told her how deeply disappointed I was, and that I had reached a breaking point where I could no longer ignore her behavior and act as like nothing was wrong. She was determined to work on both herself and our relationship, and while she admitted her problems, she pleaded with me not to give up on her. She kept promising, but I knew that our relationship had been permanently damaged. At some point, I came to the realization that staying would merely delay what was already unavoidable since the harm was too great. Our marriage was irreversibly ruined by her deception, which had caused a rift that we were unable to heal. I had to ask her to leave my house after discovering this, which was the hardest choice I have ever had to make. I was happy that our prenuptial agreement would shield me from any potential financial consequences during our divorce because we had one in place. She persisted and tried to get her friends involved in an attempt to get me to forgive her, but I refused to back down and eventually sent her out into the streets. I understand that this may come across as harsh, but I was in too much pain because I had always assumed that we would age together. But her disloyalty broke me, and I realized I would never be the same. I told my parents and older sister, Nina, everything that had happened between Susie and myself. They told me that they supported my decision to divorce Susie, which gave me some comfort, but they were astonished and horrified by the news because nobody had predicted Susie's behavior. But during it all, Nina seemed abnormally silent, which seemed strange to me. Considering how close she had been to Susie during our marriage, I asked her what she thought, and she gave me an unexpected response. Rather than acknowledge the betrayal I felt from Susie's acts, Nina asked if I was sure I wanted to divorce her, pointing out that Susie didn't have any family support, unlike me. I was surprised by Nina's answer. She appeared more focused on Susie's welfare than she did on the mental turmoil I was experiencing. I gave Nina a forceful response, telling her that Susie had chosen time and time again to betray me by being unfaithful. I didn't give a damn about her support network. I made it clear that I no longer cared for Susie's welfare and asked why she seemed to be more worried about my ex-wife than about me, her own brother. Nina defended her actions, saying that she was just concerned about me and didn't want me to decide on my marriage hastily without giving it much thought. She asked me whether I would have any regrets in the future, since she said she still couldn't believe Susie and I weren't meant to be together, and that she was shocked by our divorce. Although, at the time I thought her response was odd, I didn't think much about it afterwards. I attempted to concentrate more on finishing my divorce because the whole thing was already emotionally taxing. My divorce was flowing smoothly at first, and my attorney was optimistic that we would prevail, but then things took a turn for the worse. Susie revealed shockingly that she was expecting a child. This realization took me entirely by surprise. It was something I had not anticipated at all. It was obvious that life had other ideas for me and intended to harm me much more. Susie and her attorney pleaded with me to put an end to the divorce after hearing this news. For the sake of our child, they contended, we ought to make an effort to resolve the conflict. Susie adamantly said that she desired to raise our child in a conventional family setting. Startled, I shot back right away, telling her that I no longer gave a damn and that this child could never be mine. Susie countered that she had never had an intimate relationship with anyone save me. She made it clear that she couldn't become pregnant from her male closest friend just because she had made out with him that evening. She persisted in her urging me to fight for our marriage and to think about what was best for our child. But I was not going to be persuaded. I was aware that she was trying desperately to stall the divorce process, and guilt drove me to stay with her so she could keep using my money to support her extravagant lifestyle. I could see that Susie was clinging to hope, and I was adamant about calling it quits on the marriage. I didn't waver and insisted that the divorce would go through as scheduled. I said I would set up a paternity test once Susie gave birth to find out if the child was mine or not. Susie's attorney, however, refuted our position, arguing that since Susie was still legally married to me and had declared that she hadn't had any intimate relationships with other people, it inevitably made me the child's father. They said that because of this they would pursue child support for me. My attorney strongly disagreed, pointing out that such allegations were baseless in the absence of a paternity test. Regretfully, we are all too aware of the flaws in our legal system, particularly with regard to the protection of men in circumstances such as these. Over the next few weeks, Susie's attorney sued me for child support, providing proof that Susie had never had an intimate relationship with anyone else. They painted me as a domineering weirdo attempting to avoid having to pay child support or accept accountability for my behavior. Susie's side was represented by witnesses who were called to testify. To my surprise, my older sister Nina was one of the witnesses. It never occurred to me that she would be there. To my dismay, she testified against me, even though at first I thought she was simply there to watch and assist me, saying that she had known Susie for a long time and was positive that, since Susie was still in love with me, my sister had told her that she couldn't have betrayed me by sleeping with someone else. Nina made it clear that she thought I was the parent of the child. It broke my heart to hear my own sister defend my ex-wife over me. Nina was there to encourage Susie's dishonest activities, even though she was aware of how much I had loved Susie and how much she had hurt me. I confronted my sister about her surprise testimony after the court case was over. I voiced my dismay and sense of betrayal, feeling totally taken aback by what she did. But Nina stuck to her guns, telling me that she was doing the right thing and that my sister's viewpoint on the topic severely upset me and made me feel manipulated. I was at a loss as to how she could put Susie's financial requirements ahead of my own mental distress. My parents also told Nina that she had no right to go behind my back and testify against me, expressing their dismay in my sister. Since my own sister's testimony against me convinced the court that Susie could be telling the truth, and that I was attempting to absolve myself of our child's duty, the damage had already been done. The court decided in my ex-wife's favor and gave her child support from me until the child was 18 as a result. I was furious and would not accept the verdict. But my attorney and I did not get through to the court and could not change its mind. I've been paying child support for Susie's son, who obviously doesn't look anything like me, even though it's been a while since our divorce. Even if I've done a paternity test and it shows he's not mine, the reality remains that the child is legally mine, because my ex-wife became pregnant while we were still married. I now have to continue paying till kid becomes 18. For this reason, during this whole situation, my hatred for my sister has grown even stronger than is for my ex-wife. I only hold Nina responsible for entangling me in this predicament. This is the reason I haven't said anything to my sister at all, and won't acknowledge her presence at gatherings with the family. The rest of the family appreciates and comprehends my position. My contempt for Nina is shared by a number of cousins and relatives, who avoid her company as well. Nina has frequently bemoaned to our parents about how I've kept her apart from the rest of the family. She uses the argument that she acted in the child's best interests to defend her conduct. Her attempts to win people over, nevertheless, have been ineffective because the rest of the family sees through her folly and supports my choice. Joshua, Nina's long-term partner, and her were married last year. I didn't bother going to the wedding even though I was invited. Nina was sad to hear later from my parents that many other family members were not present as well. She and her spouse had been attempting to conceive for some time after the marriage. My parents told me how happy they were about the possibility of having a grandchild from our family at last. I recently had to go to a nearby town for a conference that my firm was hosting for work. My co-workers and I decided to spend our leisure time at the hotel bar relaxing after the conference. You can imagine how shocked I was to see my sister at the pub, seated next to an elderly man. Considering she was married, I was puzzled as to why she was in a late-night bar outside of town, so I made sure she hadn't noticed me. She leaned closer to the elderly man, whispering something in his ears that made him chuckle, and I watched. They seemed to be flirting and particularly at ease with one another, which increased my suspicions. I silently took a couple shots with my phone, reaching for it without really thinking about it. I took careful to get good pictures of my sister's face and the older man's face, needing concrete evidence of what I was seeing. My mind raced with disbelief and confusion as I saw them together at the bar. How could my married sister find herself in such a precarious situation? I was shocked to see that Nina and the man were still having a private talk while grinning and laughing. After an hour or so, the man motioned for Nina to go with him to his room, and she nodded before getting up to walk with him. My eyes grew wide as I realized that I was actually watching my sister get ready to cheat on her husband. I felt like screaming for her to stop. However, I knew from my previous experience that dishonest people never learn from their errors. Rather, they must be instructed in a lesson. I decided to get in touch with her spouse, Joshua, as soon as I got back home. I believed it was crucial for him to be aware of the reality instead of being taken by surprise, as I was. I messaged him a friend request on Facebook after finding him there, and hoping he would accept. I messaged him right away after realizing after a few hours that he had truly accepted my request. I identified myself as Nina's brother and said in the message that we needed to have a crucial discussion. I gave him my phone number so he could call me and requested him not to tell my sister that I texted him. I waited tensely for his call, hoping he would hear what I had to say. He called me a few minutes later, wanting to know why I had gotten in touch. He said that even though my parents and Nina had already told him about me, He was shocked that I had gotten in touch with him after all this time. I told him I was sorry I couldn't make it to their wedding, and I was sorry we were speaking in this situation. When he inquired as to what was wrong, I told him the truth about what I had witnessed between Nina and the older man in the hotel. I didn't want to jump to conclusions and call Nina and him cheaters right away because I wasn't sure if they were in an open marriage or not. Joshua, however, was obviously distressed and started questioning me non-stop about what Nina was wearing and who the other man was as I told him the events. Since I was having trouble believing myself, I added that I had even taken pictures of her with the gentleman to bolster my story. I sent him those pictures right away so I could provide him hard proof of what I had seen. He was obviously struggling with the seriousness of the situation and was highly upset by the news of Nina's infidelity. After a short silence, he asked why I would go out of my way to help him, given that we were effectively strangers and that I was no longer in a relationship with Nina, and he unexpectedly expressed gratitude for my candor. His inquiry touched me, and I felt compelled to respond by telling him about my own experience of being cheated on by my ex-wife. As I went into further detail, I explained how Nina's testimony against me had made my suffering even worse and how this had resulted in my having to pay child support for a kid that wasn't even mine. When Joshua heard my narrative, he was silent for a while. Then he disclosed that Nina had given him an entirely false impression of the situation. She claimed that since Susie and I had ceased having physical relationships and that our marriage was already crumbling, Susie made a single error that ultimately resulted in our divorce. Hearing this warped version of events infuriated me, so I told Joshua that Susie had cheated on me twice, letting him know that she had regularly betrayed my trust with her male companion and that our divorce was not just the result of a single mishap. Joshua, to my relief, took me at my word, valued my candor, and pointed out my sister's dishonest actions. He told me that he would be talking to Nina about this and that he also had no intention of staying with an infidelity partner. My parents called me several times in the days that followed, saying I had ruined Nina's life because she was getting a divorce. They were upset that they would never be able to have a grandchild from her after this, and accused me of interfering in her marriage needlessly. Neither did I back down from the argument. I refuted their claims, saying I had nothing to do with their daughter's unfaithfulness in her marriage. I made it clear that they ought to concentrate on instilling better morals and values in my sister so she may grow into a better person, rather than obsessing about the prospect of having a grandchild. Nina also texted me something nasty, calling me a petty little boy who couldn't keep my nose out of other people's affairs. She even implied that I deserved all that had occurred to me, and that Susie's adultery during our marriage was in some way justifiable. I was filled with rage after reading her message. I read her words and needed hours to get my bearings. But obviously fate had other plans, because I recently found out that Nina is reportedly expecting a child. Joshua denies being the father, despite her assertions to the contrary. Joshua has contacted me and asked me to testify on his behalf when their case eventually goes to court, because I took the images that implicate Nina and the other man. Without hesitation, I have consented, not just to exact revenge on my sister but also out of compassion for Joshua. I don't want another man to go through the hurt and betrayal I went through with my last spouse. Ever since, I've been under constant pressure from my parents and Nina to not testify on Joshua's behalf. Family comes first, they say again and again. Their messages strike me as ironic, especially because Nina didn't put family first for me. AITA for saving my sister's husband from the same fate I did, and for giving her a lesson? Update 1. I'm shocked by how divided people's responses to my post are. It's unbelievable that a few women are attempting to persuade me to stand by my sister, despite the fact that she has obviously strayed. All I can say to them is, shame on you. I assure you that if my ex-wife had requested child support after establishing the child's ownership, I would not have had any problems at all, but she chose not to do so. She made me knowingly responsible for the child's care since. She couldn't afford it on her own, even though she was well aware that the child wasn't mine because we weren't even intimate at the time. With the exception of the one text I was able to locate, there was no other evidence that she had sexual intercourse with that other guy. I detest my sister Nina for betraying me and testifying against my former spouse. But I won't stand by it now that Nina is controlling her spouse in the same way. In order to prevent Joshua from having the same fate, I will testify against her. Given that he seems like a lovely man, I have no doubt that Joshua will step up if it turns out in the future that the child is his once the child is born. However, unless that is established, it is senseless to require a spouse to pay child support when the woman has been openly having affairs with other men. Nina has not expressed the slightest regret for her affair or for being the reason behind her marriage's dissolution. Joshua and Nina do not even have a prenuptial agreement. Unlike my marriage, therefore it is possible that he will have to pay her alimony. Therefore, I think he should also not be required to pay child support for a kid that is not his. I think I'm making the right choice, and I'm happy to see that most people who have commented on my post support it. Update 2: I haven't posted an update in a long. I testified against my sister in court today. I went over everything I had seen her do with the older man, including all the pictures and supporting documentation. I could feel my sister's ire following me the entire time, but I didn't waver. Her attorney tried to have me withdraw my testimony on the grounds that I was jealous of my sister, but the judge accepted it. I'm hoping that Joshua's case will benefit from my testimony and that he won't have to pay child support. Nevertheless, the result is still unknown. My bond with my parents has suffered as a result of everything that has been going on. When my mother called, her voice was heavy with sorrow when she realized that I had kept my word to testify against my sister. She expressed her obvious disappointment to me and said that she and my father had hoped that I wouldn't harm my sister in this way. I couldn't help but feel a wave of frustration as I listened to her. When my sister had done the same to me throughout my divorce, I reminded her that they had never battled for me with such vigor and that they had even forgiven her for everything. Still, she was crying and calling me a disappointment, acting as though my sister's troubles and hardships were insignificant in comparison. I continued by telling my mother that, given their previous lack of support for me, it was unjust for them to chastise me for speaking the truth and standing up for what's right. I felt like I had been betrayed, and I made it plain that if they were going to put my unfaithful sister ahead of me, then neither my dad nor I needed to be in my life. Ever since, I've cut off communication with my parents and have refused to return their calls or messages. I'm happy to inform that Joshua was found not to be in arrears with his child support payments to my sister. Nina is undoubtedly upset. Knowing that at least one person was spared the unfair weight that so many others, including myself, had to bear fills me with a sense of satisfaction. For the final time, I would like to address a few more questions that have been raised under my post. No, even though I still make child support payments, I don't get along with Susie's son. I will tell the son the truth about his mother without hesitation if he ever reaches out to me as an adult. Indeed, since my parents haven't been contacting me every other day to accuse me of not supporting my sister, I have to admit that I feel a lot lighter and more at ease. We still don't talk to each other. I'm sure Nina is still ashamed that I testified against her, so she won't dare face me. Yes, as we had already anticipated, she will receive alimony from Joshua. No, my parents aren't close to Susie's son, since they are aware that he isn't my kid. Though maybe they will. I'm not sure whether they will accept Nina's child either. That's it.